Jonathan Rivers stood before the antique mirror in the small preparation room of St. Catherine's Chapel, adjusting his silver tie for what felt like the 100th time. His reflection showed a man who had everything: sharp jawline, perfectly styled dark hair, an expensive Italian suit that fit him like a second skin, and eyes the color of storm clouds that had intimidated countless business rivals. Yet today, those same eyes betrayed something he rarely allowed himself to feel: uncertainty. The weight of his father's final demand pressed heavily on his broad shoulders. Charles Rivers, founder of Rivers Global Industries, had been a man who believed in tradition above all else. His will contained one final clause that had shocked everyone, including Jonathan's team of lawyers. To inherit full control of the company and the family fortune, Jonathan had to be married before his 33rd birthday, which was exactly 6 weeks away. "This is completely insane," Jonathan muttered to his reflection, running a hand through his hair. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had built his reputation on making calculated decisions, on never leaving anything to chance. Yet here he was, about to marry a woman he had never met, chosen by his mother Victoria through some mysterious family connections. The chapel door creaked open behind him, and Benjamin Cross, his best friend since college and now his personal attorney, stepped inside. Benjamin's usually cheerful demeanor was replaced by concern as he observed his friend's obvious distress. "You know, it's not too late to call this off," Benjamin said quietly, closing the door behind him. "We could fight the will in court. It might take years, but—" "No." Jonathan's voice was firm, though his hands trembled slightly as he fastened his cufflinks. "The company employs over 10,000 people, Ben. Their livelihoods depend on Rivers Global remaining stable. I can't risk everything on a legal battle that might destroy what my father spent his life building." Benjamin studied his friend with knowing eyes. "And what about your life, John? What about what you want?" Jonathan turned away from the mirror, his expression hardening into the mask he wore in boardrooms. "What I want stopped mattering the day I took over as CEO. This is just another business decision." But even as he spoke the words, Jonathan knew they weren't entirely true. Deep down, beneath layers of responsibility and corporate armor, a part of him still hoped for something real. Something like the pure, innocent love he had experienced once, long ago, in a small town called Willowbrook, where he had spent the happiest summers of his childhood. The sound of the chapel organ beginning its processional melody interrupted his thoughts. Through the preparation room's stained glass window, he could see the handful of guests taking their seats. His mother Victoria sat in the front row, elegant and composed as always, her silver hair perfectly styled and her navy dress impeccable. A few distant relatives filled the other pews, along with some family friends who had been sworn to secrecy about this unusual arrangement. "It's time," Benjamin said softly, straightening his own tie. As Jonathan's best man, he had agreed to support this decision, even though every instinct told him his friend was making a mistake. Jonathan took a deep breath and walked toward the chapel's main sanctuary. The late afternoon sun streamed through the colorful stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the polished wooden pews. The chapel was small and intimate, exactly the kind of place he might have chosen for a real wedding if he had ever found someone to love. As he took his position at the altar beside the elderly minister, Jonathan's mind wandered back to those childhood summers in Willowbrook. His parents had sent him there every year to stay with his great-aunt Martha, believing that fresh country air and simple living would balance out his privileged city upbringing. Those had been the freest, happiest times of his life. He remembered lazy afternoons by the creek, catching fireflies at dusk, and most vividly, a girl with honey-colored hair and laughing green eyes who had been his constant companion. Amelia. Sweet, spirited Amelia, who had taught him to climb apple trees and skip stones across the water. They had shared their first kiss under the old willow tree by the pond when they were both 15, promising each other that nothing would ever separate them. But life had separated them anyway. His parents had stopped sending him to Willowbrook. When he turned 16, insisting he needed to focus on his future responsibilities, he had tried to keep in touch with Amelia through letters and phone calls. But gradually, as they both got busier with school and their separate lives, the communication had faded. By the time he graduated college, she had become a sweet memory he treasured but rarely allowed himself to revisit. The chapel doors opened with a soft whisper, and Jonathan's heart began beating faster. This was it. In moments, he would meet the woman who would become his wife, chosen by his mother through some network of family connections he didn't fully understand. Victoria had been mysteriously tight-lipped about the bride's identity, saying only that she was perfectly suitable and came from good family background. The wedding march began, and Jonathan looked up expectantly as the bride appeared in the doorway. She was alone, walking without a father to give her away, which struck him as both brave and slightly heartbreaking. Her wedding dress was simple, but elegant, made of ivory silk that seemed to glow in the chapel's golden light. A delicate veil covered her face, but he could see the graceful way she moved, the gentle curve of her shoulders. As she walked slowly down the aisle, something stirred in Jonathan's chest. A strange sense of familiarity, as if he had seen this exact scene before in a dream. The bride's bouquet was made of white roses and baby's breath, and she carried it with steady hands despite what must have been enormous nervousness. When she reached the altar and turned to face him, Jonathan's world tilted completely off its axis. With trembling hands, the bride lifted her veil, revealing a face that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. Those same laughing green eyes, now deeper and more mature, but unmistakably familiar. That same honey-colored hair, now styled in an elegant updo that showcased the graceful line of her neck. The same generous mouth that had kissed him under the willow tree all those years ago. "Amelia?" he whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. Her eyes widened with the same shock that was flooding through him. Jonathan Rivers? But you're supposed to be your husband," he finished, his voice barely audible. The minister, unaware of the dramatic reunion taking place before him, cleared his throat gently. "Shall we begin?" But Jonathan and Amelia could only stare at each other, both struggling to process the incredible coincidence that had brought them together again. In the front pew, Victoria Rivers watched with a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. This moment was exactly what she had hoped for when she had spent months tracking down Amelia Grace, the girl who had made her son happier than she had ever seen him before or since. The silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of separation, countless unspoken words, and the electric recognition of a love that had never truly died. Whatever arrangement had brought them to this moment, whatever forces had conspired to reunite them, Jonathan knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Amelia's eyes filled with tears, whether of joy, shock, or overwhelming emotion he couldn't tell. But when she smiled, that radiant smile that had lit up his teenage summers, Jonathan felt something inside his chest unlock for the first time in years. "Hello, Jonathan," she said softly, her voice carrying all the warmth and sweetness he remembered. "I guess we have a lot to talk about." He reached out and took her hands, feeling the same electric connection that had sparked between them 15 years ago. "I guess we do," he replied, unable to stop smiling despite the surreal nature of their situation. The minister cleared his throat again, and they both turned to face him, still holding hands, still marveling at the impossible turn their lives had just taken. Behind them, Benjamin shook his head in amazement while Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. As the ceremony began, neither Jonathan nor Amelia heard much of the traditional words. They were too busy stealing glances at each other, both wondering if this was real or just an incredibly vivid dream. The boy and girl who had promised to love each other forever under a willow tree were about to become husband and wife in the most unexpected way possible. When the minister pronounced them married and invited Jonathan to kiss his bride, He hesitated for just a moment. This woman was his past, his sweetest memory, and now, impossibly, his future. As their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss that tasted of tears and wonder, both of them knew that their story was just beginning all over again. The Rivers family estate sprawled across 200 acres of pristine countryside, its Georgian mansion rising like something from a fairy tale against the backdrop of rolling hills and ancient oak trees. As their car wound up the circular driveway, Amelia pressed her face to the window, marveling at the manicured gardens and marble fountains that seemed to belong to another world entirely. Jonathan sat beside her in the back seat, stealing glances at his new wife every few moments as if to reassure himself that she was real. The initial shock of their reunion had given way to a mixture of joy and profound uncertainty. 15 years was a long time. They were no longer the carefree teenagers who had promised each other forever under a willow tree. "It's beautiful," Amelia whispered as they pulled up to the mansion's grand entrance, where ivy climbed the stone walls and roses bloomed in perfect symmetry along the walkway. "It's home," Jonathan replied, though his voice carried a note of distance. This place had always felt more like a museum than a home to him, filled with priceless antiques and family portraits that seemed to watch his every move with disapproving eyes. Victoria had tactfully arranged to give them privacy for their honeymoon, weak, retreating to her apartment in the city with promises to let the young people get reacquainted. As the car disappeared down the driveway, Jonathan and Amelia found themselves alone together for the first time since their wedding ceremony. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably as they stood in the marble foyer, surrounded by oil, paintings of stern-faced Rivers ancestors. Amelia clutched her small suitcase, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the opulence around her. Her simple art gallery in downtown Portland seemed like a world away from this grand estate. "I should show you to your room," Jonathan said finally, his voice formal and careful. "I mean, if you'd prefer separate rooms. I don't want you to feel pressured about anything." Amelia looked up at him, seeing the uncertainty in his storm-gray eyes. This polite stranger bore little resemblance to the laughing boy who had taught her to fish in Willowbrook's Creek. "Separate rooms would be fine," she agreed softly. "At least until we figure out what this all means." He led her up the sweeping staircase to a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens, and everything from the silk wallpaper to the antique furniture spoke of wealth beyond her imagination. "There's a connecting door," Jonathan said, gesturing toward a door on the far wall. "My room is next door. If you need anything, just knock." After he left, Amelia sank onto the velvet settee by the window, finally allowing herself to process everything that had happened. When Victoria Rivers had approached her 6 months ago about an arranged marriage, Amelia had initially laughed at the absurdity of it. But Victoria had been persuasive, painting a picture of a lonely, successful man who needed a stable partnership more than a passionate romance. Amelia's art gallery was struggling financially, and her dream of opening an art school for underprivileged children seemed impossible without significant funding. Victoria's offer of a substantial settlement had been tempting, but what had really convinced Amelia was the older woman's obvious love for her son and her genuine belief that this arrangement could benefit everyone involved. She had never imagined that the mysterious groom would be Jonathan Rivers, the boy who had captured her heart during those magical summers in Willowbrook, the boy whose letters she had treasured until they stopped coming, the boy she had never quite managed to forget, despite the years and the distance and the other relationships that had never quite measured up to that pure first love. A soft knock on the connecting door interrupted her thoughts. "Amelia, would you like some dinner? Mrs. Henderson, our housekeeper, has prepared something for us." They ate in the smaller dining room, though smaller was relative in a mansion where even the informal dining space could seat 12 people. Mrs. Henderson, a kindly woman in her 60s, served them herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and disappeared discreetly, leaving them alone with their awkward conversation. "So you own an art gallery," Jonathan said, cutting his salmon with precise movements. "That's wonderful. You always loved to draw. You remember that? Amelia asked, surprised by the warmth in her chest at his words. I remember everything, he said quietly, meeting her eyes across the table. Those summers in Willowbrook were the best part of my childhood. They began to talk then, tentatively at first, sharing memories of their teenage years. Jonathan told her about the letters he had written but never sent after his parents forbade contact with Willowbrook, wanting him to focus on his preparation for taking over the family business. Amelia spoke of her college years studying art, her dream of becoming a painter that had evolved into opening her gallery and teaching art to children. I tried to find you once, she admitted, twirling her wine glass between her fingers. About 5 years ago. I Googled your name and found articles about Rivers Global Industries, but you seemed so far removed from the Jonathan I knew. I convinced myself you had probably forgotten all about that silly girl from Willowbrook. Forgotten? Jonathan's laugh was bitter. Amelia, you've been my standard for every relationship I've ever had. No one could compare to you to what we had. Maybe that's not fair, but it's the truth. The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes as she realized that she had done the same thing, measuring every man against the memory of the boy who had kissed her under the willow tree. Over the following days, they slowly began to rediscover each other. Jonathan showed her around the estate, pointing out his favorite spots from childhood. There was the old oak tree where he had built a tree house similar to the one they had shared in Willowbrook, and the lily pond where he had practiced skipping stones, thinking of her. They walked through the rose gardens in the evening, talking about their separate journeys through life. Jonathan spoke of the pressure he had felt to live up to his father's expectations, the loneliness of always being seen as the heir to the Rivers' fortune rather than simply as himself. Amelia shared her struggles as an artist, trying to make a difference in the world, her failed engagement to a fellow artist who had ultimately wanted her to give up her gallery and focus solely on supporting his career. I've been wondering, Amelia said one evening as they sat by the fountain in the center garden, how did your mother find me? It can't have been coincidence. Jonathan smiled, a real smile that reminded her strongly of the boy she had fallen in love with. I asked her the same thing yesterday. Apparently she hired a private investigator. She remembered how happy I was during those summers, and she's been searching for you for over a year. She orchestrated all of this? Every detail. The will requiring marriage was real, but the choice of bride was entirely hers. She said she knew the moment she met you again, that you were still the same sweet girl who had made her son laugh for the first time in years. They were sitting close enough that their knees touched, and Amelia found herself studying the man Jonathan had become. He was still handsome, though his face bore the weight of responsibility and years of high pressure decisions. His hands, which had once been soft and boyish, now showed the calluses of a man who still enjoyed working with them despite his corporate position. What happens now? She asked softly. We're married, but we're strangers too. 15 years is a long time, Jonathan. We're not the same people we were. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious and intent. No, we're not the same. But Amelia, sitting here with you, I feel more like myself than I have in years. You make me remember who I used to be before I became Jonathan Rivers, CEO. You make me remember who I wanted to be. That night, for the first time since their wedding, they kissed again. It started softly, tentatively, a question asked and answered without words. But as their lips moved together, 15 years of separation seemed to melt away. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry and desperate, as if they were trying to make up for all the lost time in a single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers. I don't want to rush this, he whispered. I don't want to mess this up again. We were children then, Amelia replied, her hands framing his face. We didn't have a choice about being separated. This time, we do have a choice. And what do you choose? She kissed him again, soft and sweet and full of promise. I choose to try. I choose to see if the love we had as teenagers can grow into something even stronger as adults. He carried her to his room that night, and they made love slowly, tenderly, relearning each other's bodies and discovering how passion had matured along with their hearts. Afterward, they lay entwined in the moonlight streaming through the tall windows, talking softly about their dreams and fears. I want to keep my gallery, Amelia said, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertip. And I want to start that art school for children. I know you have obligations here, but I can't give up everything I've built. I wouldn't ask you to, Jonathan replied, stroking her hair. Maybe we can find a way to make both our dreams work. Rivers Global has a foundation that focuses on education. We could expand it to include arts programs. As the week progressed, they fell into a rhythm that felt both new and comfortably familiar. They cooked breakfast together in the large kitchen, much to Mrs. Henderson's amusement. They took long walks around the estate, holding hands and talking, about everything and nothing. Jonathan showed her his home office, and Amelia was touched to see a small framed photo on his desk from one of their summers in Willowbrook. You kept this all these years? I told you, I never forgot, he said, simply. By the end of their honeymoon week, they had crossed some invisible threshold. They were no longer strangers thrown together by circumstance, nor were they children clinging to a memory of first love. They were adults who had chosen each other, who had decided to build something real and lasting from the foundation of their shared past. But challenges remained. Jonathan's world was one of board meetings and business dinners, charity galas and country club memberships. Amelia's world was paint-stained smocks and late nights at the gallery, community art fairs, and teaching children to see beauty in everyday things. Are you sure you want this? Amelia asked on their last morning at the estate, as they prepared to return to the city and begin their real life together. Are you sure you want me? Because once we leave here, there's no going back. Jonathan took her hands in his, the same way he had 15 years ago under the willow tree. Amelia Grace, I have spent 15 years trying to find something that felt as right as loving you. I'm not letting you go again. Whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together. She smiled, the radiant smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. Then let's go build our life together, Jonathan Rivers. All of it. The messy, complicated, beautiful reality of it. As their car pulled away from the estate, heading back toward the city and their future, both of them knew that they were no longer the same people who had stood at the altar a week ago. They had rediscovered not just their love for each other, but themselves, and that, they both realized, was the most precious gift of all. 6 months after their wedding, Jonathan and Amelia had settled into a rhythm of married life that surprised them both with its natural ease. Their penthouse apartment in Manhattan was a perfect blend of his sophisticated minimalism and her artistic warmth. Splashes of color from her paintings brightened the neutral walls, and her easel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows where the morning light was perfect for painting. Jonathan had kept his promise about supporting her dreams. The Rivers Foundation had provided the funding for Amelia's art school, which she had named Canvas Dreams. Located in a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn, it offered free art classes to underprivileged children and had quickly become her passion project. The Johnson twins finished their mural today, Amelia told him over dinner, her face glowing with excitement. You should have seen their faces when they stepped back and realized what they had created together. It's moments like that which remind me why I do this. Jonathan watched his wife with growing admiration. She had thrown herself into the art school with the same dedication he brought to his business ventures, but with a joy and fulfillment he rarely felt in boardrooms. Her happiness was infectious, and he found himself looking forward to her stories about her students almost as much as she enjoyed telling them. I'd like to visit the school, he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I know you've been wanting me to meet the kids. Really? Her face lit up even brighter. They've been asking about my mysterious husband, who they think must be some kind of prince because I live in a castle in the sky. A castle in the sky? That's what 8-year-old Maria calls our apartment. She's not wrong, really. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. But their happiness was not without its challenges. Jonathan's business world remained largely separate from Amelia's artistic community, and the two circles sometimes clashed in uncomfortable ways. At charity galas and society functions, Amelia often felt out of place among the wives who seemed to have no interests beyond shopping and gossip. Some of them whispered about Jonathan's unusual choice of bride, questioning what a powerful CEO could possibly see in a simple art teacher. Mrs. Rivers, Patricia Ashworth, wife of one of Jonathan's business partners, had cornered Amelia at a recent fundraising event. "How delightfully bohemian of you to actually work. Most of us find that marriage provides quite enough occupation." Amelia had smiled politely, but the comment stung. She belonged to Jonathan's world by marriage, but she would never belong to it by nature or inclination. The situation came to a head during a dinner party at the Ashworth's estate in the Hamptons. Jonathan was deep in conversation with potential investors while Amelia found herself seated between two women whose idea of meaningful conversation seemed to revolve around their latest purchases and upcoming vacations. "Of course, we'll summer in the Riviera this year," Mrs. Blackwell was saying, "though I hear the yacht club there has become rather common lately." "Amelia, dear," Mrs. Ashworth interrupted, "I don't believe you've mentioned your summer plans. Will you be traveling with Jonathan on his business trip to Tokyo?" "Actually, I'll be running a summer art camp for inner-city children," Amelia replied, trying to keep her voice pleasant. "We're expecting over 100 kids this year." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Blackwell raised an eyebrow. "How charitable of you. Though I'm surprised Jonathan allows you to spend your summers in such environments." "Jonathan doesn't allow or disallow me to do anything," Amelia said, her temper finally breaking through her polite facade. "I'm his wife, not his possession." The tension at the table was palpable. Jonathan, sensing something was wrong, looked over from his conversation with concern. Later, in the car on the way home, the argument that had been building for months finally erupted. "I can't keep doing this, Jonathan," Amelia said, staring out at the dark landscape rushing past. "I don't fit into your world, and I'm tired of pretending I do." "What do you mean?" But he knew what she meant. He had seen the way some people looked at her, the subtle condescension in their voices when they spoke to his wife. "I mean that I'm never going to be the kind of wife your world expects. I'm never going to spend my days planning dinner parties and my evenings making small talk about nothing. That's not who I am." Jonathan pulled the car over to the side of the road, his jaw tight with frustration. "I never asked you to be anyone other than who you are. But everyone else expects it. Your colleagues, their wives, even some of your board members. I see the way they look at me, Jonathan. I'm the charity case you married, the poor girl who got lucky. That's not true, and you know it, is it?" Amelia turned to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if you would have chosen me if I had just been some random woman your mother found. Or if it's only because I represent some idealized memory of your childhood." The accusation hit harder than Jonathan expected because there was a grain of truth in it that he had been trying to ignore. "Amelia, I love you," she continued, her voice breaking. "I love you so much it terrifies me. But I can't spend the rest of my life feeling like I'm not good enough for the world you live in." They drove the rest of the way home in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. That night, they slept on opposite sides of their king-sized bed, the distance between them feeling like an ocean. The breakthrough came 3 days later when Jonathan arrived at Canvas Dreams unannounced. He had left an important meeting early, telling his assistant to reschedule everything for the afternoon. He needed to see Amelia in her element, to remind himself why he had fallen in love with the woman she had become, not just the girl she had been. He found her in the main studio, surrounded by a dozen children ranging in age from 6 to 16. She was helping a shy 10-year-old named Marcus mixed colors for his painting of the Brooklyn Bridge, her patience and enthusiasm evident in every gesture. The secret, she was telling him, is to really look at what you're painting. Don't paint what you think the bridge should look like. Paint what you actually see. But what if what I see is wrong? Marcus asked. There's no wrong in art, Amelia replied gently. There's only your truth, and your truth is just as valid as anyone else's. Jonathan watched from the doorway, unnoticed, as his wife moved from student to student, offering encouragement and guidance. Her face was paint-streaked, her clothes casual and comfortable, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had never looked more beautiful to him. When the class ended and the children had gone home, Amelia finally noticed him standing there. How long have you been watching? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Long enough, he said, walking toward her. Long enough to remember why I fell in love with you all over again? Jonathan. No, let me say this. You were right the other night. I have been letting my world make you feel like you don't belong. But the truth is, Amelia, you don't belong in that world because you're too good for it. You're too real, too honest, too passionate about things that actually matter. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. I don't want you to change to fit my world, he continued. I want to change my world to deserve you. I want to be the kind of man who's worthy of someone who creates beauty and hope and gives children the confidence to paint their truth. But your business, your responsibilities, will still be there. But maybe it's time I started using my position to support things that matter, not just to make more money. Maybe it's time Rivers Global Industries started being known for more than just profit margins. That evening, they talked long into the night about their future. Jonathan proposed a radical restructuring of his business priorities, focusing more on sustainable practices and community development. Amelia shared her dreams of expanding Canvas Dreams into a nationwide program, bringing art education to underserved communities across the country. We could do it together, Jonathan said, his eyes bright with possibilities. Use the resources I have access to, combined with your vision and passion. We could actually make a difference. You'd really want to do that? It would mean less profit, more complicated business decisions. It would mean working towards something meaningful with the woman I love. There's no decision to make. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. Within a year, Rivers Global had launched its first community development initiative, partnering with local organizations to create educational and artistic programs in underserved areas. Jonathan discovered that business could be both profitable and purposeful, and he found himself more energized by his work than he had been in years. Amelia's art school expanded to include locations in 5 major cities, each one adapted to serve the specific needs of its community. She divided her time between teaching, program development, and her own art, which had evolved to reflect her experiences working with children and communities. The society wives who had once looked down on her gradually began to seek her out, wanting to be associated with her successful programs. Some genuine friendships formed, particularly with women who, like her, were looking for ways to make their privileged positions meaningful. You've changed everything, Victoria told them over dinner at the estate on their first wedding anniversary. Not just for each other, but for our family, our business, our community. Your father would be so proud, Jonathan. 2 years after their wedding, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. They were in the penthouse's kitchen making breakfast together, as had become their Sunday tradition, when she shared the news. Jonathan's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen as she laughed and cried simultaneously. A baby, he whispered against her hair. Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, suddenly, nervous. They had talked about children but hadn't actively been trying. Happy? He set her down and framed her face with his hands. Amelia, I'm ecstatic. Terrified, but ecstatic. Their daughter was born on a snowy December morning, arriving 3 weeks early but perfectly healthy. They named her Lily Grace Rivers, After both the lily pond at the estate where Jonathan had thought of Amelia during their years apart, and Amelia's middle name, holding his daughter for the first time, Jonathan felt something shift inside him, a completeness he hadn't even known he was missing. This tiny person represented everything good about his future with Amelia, everything pure and hopeful and worth protecting. "She's perfect," Amelia whispered from the hospital bed, watching her husband cradle their daughter with infinite tenderness. "She's ours," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. 5 years after their arranged marriage had brought them back together, Jonathan and Amelia stood in the garden of the estate, where they had rediscovered their love. Lily, now a precocious 4-year-old with her father's gray eyes and her mother's artistic temperament, was showing her grandmother Victoria how to paint watercolor flowers. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your mother hadn't arranged our marriage?" Amelia asked, leaning against Jonathan's side as they watched their daughter. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I think about everything we have now, everything we've built together, and I can't imagine any other path could have led us here." "Even the difficult parts?" "Especially the difficult parts. They taught us that love isn't just about feeling good together. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. It's about growing together instead of apart." Amelia smiled, thinking of all the ways their lives had intertwined and expanded since that shocking moment at the altar. Canvas Dreams now operated in 12 cities and had touched the lives of thousands of children. Rivers Global had become a model for socially responsible business practices. Their marriage had produced not just personal happiness, but positive change in the world around them. "Mama, Daddy, look!" Lily called out, holding up her painting of the estate's rose garden. "I painted our home!" Jonathan and Amelia exchanged a look full of love, gratitude, and wonder at the beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect life they had created together. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Amelia called back. "Just like everything else you paint." "Just like everything else in our life," Jonathan added quietly, pressing a kiss to his wife's temple. As the sun set over the estate where their love story had been reborn, the Rivers family continued their evening in the garden, surrounded by the flowers Victoria had planted, the laughter of their child, and the deep contentment that comes from building something lasting together. Their arranged marriage had become the greatest love story of their lives, proving that sometimes the best things come not from careful planning, but from having the courage to embrace the unexpected gifts that life offers. Their story was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more dreams to pursue, more love to give and receive. But whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they had promised each other under a willow tree when they were young, and again, at an altar when they found each other again, and every day since as they built their forever, one choice at a time.